Hi, y'all. It's Bridget Cutchaw with Real Things Living. Today, my guest is Lisa DeAngelis. She is an author, speaker, and a holistic change practitioner. And I like that she is committed to walking her talk. I think that is so important. Can you say hi, Lisa?
Hello, it's so nice to be here with you today.
And I appreciate you being here. And I really think what you're doing is so important. One thing we have in common is we like to focus on resilience, and you're helping so many people to get through or to build the resilience. Is that the right word? So, yeah, what got you into down this path to help other people?
Well, the funny part about my personal story is that I like to say it's been a whole series of best laid plans over and over again, which is another way of saying life has required me to be extraordinarily resilient and adaptable against my best intentions at times. And so I like to sort of say, change decided that it was really going to teach me a lot. And now I feel like I need to help teach others about change. It's something we sort of take for granted because it's always around in the background. And it's also, oh, do we hear a little bit of resilience and adaptability right now? I don't know if you can hear that. We've got a lot of horns popping around. I live in New York City. Um, and it's just one of these funny, interesting spaces that changes all around us all of the time. But we forget that it is a part of our lives that we have an opportunity to actually create a relationship with, make friends with. And then what happens on the other side? What happens to these qualities about who we are and how we move through the world that can enhance our next steps and who we want to be. So that's sort of a short version of what led me to where I am today, is a lot of things that didn't go my way.
Well, it sounds like you reflected on those experiences and it helped you move forward because I think some people, they're afraid of change, and so
Mhm.
they hold themselves back, and that can hinder I shouldn't say growth. Is that the right word?
Well, I do actually think it can hinder our growth because if we are in this place where we're caught struggling between holding on really tightly and being able to move forward, it inevitably requires letting go. One of my sort of favorite phrases is that life is really in that balance space of holding on and letting go. And it's hard for us. It's hard for us to let go. We don't want to. And sometimes there's even some grief that has to come along with that fear, right? Because it can be difficult to say goodbye to chapters of our lives, relationships that no longer serve us, a job we really loved, but just doesn't fit our needs anymore. But those things go hand in hand because in order to move forward, we do have to let go of something. We can't just keep amassing because, anybody who's tried carrying groceries in from the car knows that there is a critical mass point where you have to put something down. You can't just keep adding on to the pile.
Yeah, it gets too heavy, the
Yeah.
weight. I
Yeah.
like that analogy you said. It's too heavy, and I'm guilty of trying to not let go of something sometimes. I think we all have those experiences, and
Mhm.
it's tough just being in this world these days, but, I mean, I'm just trying to be I try to find humor too, that helps me to get
Yes, in case
through
you
the day.
didn't notice, I prefer to try to find the lighter side of things as well because I think, it's one of those funny, if we can't laugh, we might cry situations. And a good cry is amazing. But certainly, I have found, especially recently, laughter is really an amazing tool for allowing us to connect with other people, but also just change our perspective. It puts us in a different physical space when you just start laughing. And it
Absolutely.
lets you kind of see some different angles in a way that maybe you couldn't before.
That's true. You can see their understand different perspectives, and that the humor, I think some people you've mentioned before we got on this call about the power of, I should say the power of words, but words are so important even when you're telling a joke sometimes. Depends on
Mm.
who you're telling it to. And I don't know, what you think about that, right? What is the
Well, it's really interesting because during COVID, which was such a fantastical time for all of us. And I use that word intentionally because it's almost like we couldn't even imagine. And so it just became more and more like if we read this in a book years before, someone would say, no way that that happened. No way that that's possible. No way that everyone changed so quickly, adapted so fast, established so much resilience. But, I really think this is a big part of it. One of the things I talked to someone about during that time was cultural changes, things that are changing collectively. One of the first signs of that is a shift in language. And we've seen that over the years, right? We didn't always talk about some of these things that we now talk about. It's very commonplace to even utilize the word trauma when we're talking about little t trauma, whereas before the word was very heavily associated with a very specific big T trauma event that someone might have managed and dealt with in their lives. So those kinds of shifts are actually one of the things that support collective change. So if we can be really intentional about the words we're choosing and how we're applying them, I really think it lets us explore a different pathway to how we want to move forward. It's one of the reasons that my book I titled very intentionally Embracing the Unknown. I could have sort of said navigating the unknown or pursuing or something like, but the word embrace, it really means to hold closely with affection, which is an interesting kind of corner of that word,
Right.
if you will. And it can also mean accepting or supporting willingly and enthusiastically. So what happens if we not just sort of say, oh gosh, there's the unknown, it's change, I have to do it. But what happens if we really have this tenderness about saying, I'm going to really embrace this moment and figure out what's there for me, dig in, figure out what I need to let go of, what I maybe want to add on, and bring into the color palette of how I'm going to move forward in the next phase of my life.
I like that, how you kind of weaved in, like emotions are involved with this change, and you want it to be positive, and then the color palette. I like that
Well,
aspect. Yeah.
yeah, and it's so funny you say that because what do we think of when we think of change? It's a lot of negative emotions. It's a lot of fear. It's a lot of, oh, I don't want to do that. Change again, and I often think to myself, if this was a relationship, if this was a friend, if change was a person in your life that you were talking to, if we're going to personify change for a moment, how would change feel if every single time it walks into the room, we look at it and we go, oh, you again? When we see it calling on our phone, how is your reaction? What is your reaction? And can you take a moment to just pause and say, huh, do I have to have that reaction? What if I just take a moment and say, okay, when I answer this phone, I'm going to just go into this with an open mind and say, what's up today? How are we doing? What's next to explore?
Right. I think you got to ask questions. You have to, and to listen to the answers that you're receiving, to, right before you react. And
Absolutely, absolutely. And curiosity for me is one of those huge tenets. And I think it's one of the things that supports our capacity for resilience in general is because if we really make assumptions, which is sort of the opposite of being curious, if we make assumptions, it's very, very hard to shift fluidly, right? If we lead with curiosity, there's a lot more space to dig into not only how something might serve us, but what might be there a layer or two deeper, or just outside of our periphery where we didn't necessarily see because we were looking with blinders on.
I like how you use the word curious, because that's something that's helped drive me forward to deal with changes. And one of my things I give away is I have a business card. I give out bookmarkers. I say this, and it says "keep being curious," and on the back is my. And I think that is just, I just subconsciously knew that it helped me, and I want other people to think about that. And again, it's in line with what you're saying, to walk the talk. I think a lot of people, which I don't know, they got to walk the talk, not just, right, just blah blah blah. You actually need to be doing it, and do what you're saying. And I think
Mhm.
that helps build trust, right?
Oh, absolutely. And for me, I think part of when I say something like that, walking my talk, it's not to sit here in this conversation or stand in front of everyone and say, I have figured this out.
Right,
Yes,
we
we all
haven't.
have moments. There's a joke that you write the book you most need to read. Well, you know, that I
Right.
wrote a book about navigating change, and I started off this conversation by saying my life has been sort of a series of these best laid plans that didn't go according to my quote plan. And so I think that's part of it, right? Is to say, yeah, I have to be honest with myself and everyone I encounter to say, I do not have this figured out, but I have at least kept showing up. And I think that's the piece for me about curiosity. That's the piece for me about any of this, especially resilience, is a big piece of it is to keep showing up. And sometimes that is enough to move you forward. It doesn't have to be some big grand gesture. It doesn't have to be some major shift in your life. It is this keep showing up day after day, situation after situation, and being willing to be surprised. For me, that's a big piece of curiosity.
Yeah, like you got to keep showing up, got to keep moving forward, one step at a time. I talk about that, and then all this when I'm just thinking of the word change too, it has to also, if you accept it, it should also be, is it in line with your core values?
I love that.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely love that. This idea of personal core values, I think, is really great. I've gotten into a practice of not only creating a personal mission statement and really being clear about what my core values are, but revisiting it. Because as we shift,
Yes.
sometimes we need to realign things. And I like saying that. It's not always that we need to toss things or throw away what served us before, but it's just a little bit of a realignment. And I think that's an important piece of it. I think with any of these concepts, navigating change, resilience, these processes, it's really important for us to understand that we take time to build in wellness habits in many areas of our lives. Exercise is one of them for people. How many people have exercise routines? Health and wellness is a really big thing right now, especially. It always has been in the background, but it's taken a kind of different front and center approach right now. But I like to ask people, what's your exercise routine for change? How
That's
are you really working on that muscle? You don't wait until you have to lift something really heavy and then expect your body to be able to do that. And as we know, when you're strengthening muscles, they shake. There is that moment of your body sort of going, oh my gosh, what
right.
is happening? But it's important that we move through that rather than just shy away from it, because that's a sign that something is moving, something is actually changing at a very physiological level. So that's a fun question for me lately is like, what's your change exercise routine? How are you actually practicing change skills, even if you're not doing it? Because a lot of people will sit back and say, well, I'm not changing anything in my life. I'm pretty happy with my life. And I love that for people. That's amazing. But we all will encounter moments where we're going to have to move towards change of some sort.
Right. We're all always going to have unexpected things happen to us. And I like how you're saying building that muscle for change. It just, you don't want it to be weak. So that's the right word. Because the outcome could not be what you want or need or something. I'm not sure. I've never heard that before. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it just puts you a little more in the driver's seat, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You have a sense of where your strength is. You know, if you're recovering from any sort of anything, right? If you've had a surgery, if you've just had an issue with your body and you're trying to recover from an injury, you really kind of need to know what your body's limits are in relationship to movement, in relationship to exercise, let's say. But the same is true. I mean, there is a reason that change happens as a process. There is a reason we don't wake up one day and things are drastically different. It would be very hard for our systems to assimilate that. And I think that's also where this conversation about resilience loops back in, is because doing it slowly lets us have the opportunity to sort of have this elasticity moving. I love that definition of resilience, including the word elasticity,
Yeah.
right? After something is stretched, bent, compressed, it can return to its original form in sort of this really beautiful, elastic way. But again, that's something that we have to kind of figure out. We've got to feel out our edges, right? Of what it means to be bent, what it means to stretch ourselves and be able to kind of come back and settle in again, maybe with a new normal.
I like it also that word stronger made me think of that when you're talking about using those muscles. It could be physical and mental, or you have to practice. And I I agree that you have to do it in smaller steps for it to stick.
Oh yeah, of course. And I think this is where another big piece for me comes in is this, like, we have to give ourselves some permission for it to not be perfect. We have to give ourselves some permission to, I joke about like the bad F words, right? Fail, fall, any of these things, fear, like these really bad words that we think, oh, these are such horrible things, but we have to give ourselves permission to experience that because it's actually how we grow. It's actually how we grow.
I like that reference because I used to be a perfectionist, and I
Mm,
don't know why I was. I don't know. I think that's just maybe more normal for women, maybe because we don't
mhm.
want to put ourselves out there. If there's flaws, there's another F word for you.
Yes, that's a great one. I'm gonna add that to my list. Yeah, another word.
Kind of flaw, but nothing is just like I'm helped people in the past, like with books and stuff, and it's not going to be perfect the first time around. It's not. It doesn't matter how many people read it. There's always going to be something that falls through but it's okay, and it's normal. And I think that is what people they fear, right? Of putting
Yes.
there, and it's okay to feel fear. I think if you're like extreme fear, no, don't do it. But I mean, you just got to get some help. And I
But you
think,
bring up a really good point. There
yeah,
is a difference between fear that is related to physical safety
yes,
or like actual, like, I am afraid at a core biological level because I actually might die. That is
right,
a fear
that's
that is
different. Yes,
important to heed. But I
yeah.
think it is interesting to ask ourselves, one of my favorite reframes of the word fear, right? Is this whole idea that, like, what if we actually look at fear as not the kind of biological fear I was just talking about, but fear as false evidence appearing real.
Oh,
Because what we're really fearful of is we haven't done something yet. It's new to us. It's
right.
unknown. And if we just use the word unknown, what do you think of, right? Somebody will say like the unknown, the great vast unknown, but anything we haven't done yet is just unknown to us. So when we go to approach it, our system is tracking back for previous experience that helps us understand how we can classify it, right? So it's looking for evidence from our past. And
Yeah,
it's of saying, oh, we did that before, or we've never done anything like that before. So this is triggering some of these fear bells. But what if we could actually look at our system and say, actually, we're looking at some false evidence here. It feels really real that you can't do this, or it's too hard, or it's very, unnerving, all of which can be true. But it doesn't mean that that's the reality of the situation. It's
right.
just our system's first attempt to classify it in a way that helps us make sense of the world. And we should be so grateful for these mechanisms in our system that help protect us as we move out into things we don't know yet. But it's also a great opportunity to say, can I challenge that a little bit? Is that really true? What's actually going
Right.
on? And we do have that ability if we give ourselves the permission.
As you were talking, it made me think of your background too. Your experiences also is connected to like the relationships you have. And you're remembering that. And I was very adventurous when I was young because I had an older brother, and I didn't,
Mm.
what was I thinking? But anyway, I survived. But I meant that helped me. I have some perfectionism, but I have less fear of things than some people. I think because of that experiences, I survived. I'm just kidding. But I think that sometimes is ingrained subconsciously, right? Your relationships probably have, in situations have affected that. So
Oh gosh, of course. And failure is another big one for recovering perfectionists, as I like to
yes, yes.
say. Someone asked me when I was younger, like, are you type A? And I'm like, well,
What does that mean? Right.
A plus? I don't know. I'm an overachiever too. So
Yep.
but I really do think that's a part of it, is this fear of failure. But again, if we switch up that reframe, if fear can be that false evidence appearing real, fail can be a first attempt in learning. And that's my favorite fail
Like that.
reframe, is to sort of say, Failure is not the end of the line. It is a learning curve. And I always think to myself, we live in a world right now where social media can be so challenging for that because we see the end, we see the finished product. We don't see all of the attempts. We don't
Right,
see
the
the-
process.
those processes, those learnings that have to happen along the way. And one of my favorite, quotes, aphorisms that I always come back to is Thomas Edison, right? Saying, I've tried everything. I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work. And I think that is so important, is to say we could look at one quote failed attempt as some sort of shortcoming that reflects on us personally. Or we can say, okay, cool, that one is off the list. Now we've got all of these other ones to try that can get us closer to where we want to be.
I like what you're saying, that we need to be more open about sharing those failures, or
Mhm.
because people will resonate with that and it will make them feel better if they can connect and relate and not feel so bad about themselves. Like you mentioned, social media is always, "Oh, this is perfect and this is how it turned out." But what about the whole journey that got you there?
That got you there. Absolutely. And it does get really easy to sort of feel like we're the only ones that have ever dealt with this. And I think when we do connect with other people and recognize that this is totally normal, it's actually a healthy part of the process,
Hmm.
that becomes really even more exciting. So this is really tangential, but I feel like I really want to share it because this is a little bit also how my brain works.
Okay.
It's not just us as people, right? When I was writing my book in the section on resilience, I found this really fascinating study. It was a research study on resilience in social infrastructure of insect systems. So this researcher actually looked at ant colonies and how they responded to disruption. And it was fascinating because there were three main ways that these ant colonies sort of displayed resilience. One of them was the idea of resistance, where their infrastructure was sort of built up to try to be resistant to any sort of disturbances, right? So building super strong foundations, super strong systems. Then there was a whole group of these ants that were really skilled and displayed this idea of redirection. So they could pivot. In the face of a threat, they could redirect their resources and energy very quickly, and they could go and try and like really quickly build up and support one aspect so they could preserve as much as possible. And then there was a whole nother group that sort of wouldn't fight the initial impact, and they would focus on rebuilding. And sometimes those ant colonies would end up stronger than in the first place.
Right.
I thought to myself, gosh, this isn't even just about people. This isn't like, how do you get back up when you fall? This is like really looking at what is your strategic approach to what it means to be resilient. What is your leaning when it comes to something like this? And in real life, it could be that you set up really good infrastructure. You rehearse before an interview that you have. You study really hard before you're going to meet with somebody new so that you can really be fully, kept up to speed on what's happening. It could be that you just get a little bit sharper about reading social cues in a meeting so that you can read the room and really pivot and really get to know what the needs of whomever you're talking to would be. And then, of course, we all deal with these layers of reconstruction where we have to put the pieces back together, right? And
Right.
so I think it's important to remember that these examples are everywhere in the world. We are not alone. There are ways to really take time to say, who do I want to be in this space where we have a choice about how to react to something that happens in our life, to change, right? When we're confronted with something that we don't necessarily know how to handle. We've got tools, we've got resources. And if we feel like we don't, we might need someone else externally, a relationship in our life, to help remind us of what's actually there. Because it's easy to lose sight of what we are capable of on our own when we're really in it.
Right, we don't wanna get stuck. I love the analogy, the story of the ants. I mean, it's really part of nature too. That's kinda nature. We can learn from nature and how that constantly, I don't know how many, millions and millions of years these different animals and things like that have to adjust.
Absolutely. And we're into fall now, a season where what happens? The trees let go of all their leaves, not because, they're never going to get them back, but because they're preparing for a new phase of their cycle. And so, that's kind of full circle to what we started talking about, this idea of, life being this balance between holding on and knowing when and how to let go. And that's a skill. It takes some strengthening, but we have these tools and resources available to us. And often I think it's more than we realize.
Right.
I don't give ourselves nearly enough credit.
We take our knowledge and our experience for granted, and
Absolutely.
we're
Absolutely.
just talking to ourselves internally.
We've got to get out of that loop, right? That could be one of the best places to start to say, what's my internal narrative telling me right now? And is that really the truth of the matter?
Right, and I think, we compare ourselves too much too. I think that I've seen my understanding is the downside of some of social media. We're comparing ourselves, and that's bringing out the negativity in our back of our minds, and I think it's so awesome. So, what do you think to help, some of the keys or tools that people need to support, like, change and growth? What do you
Well, I'm not just saying this because this is a podcast about resilience, but I
think?
talked in one of my chapters about tools. Three of my main tools are adaptability, resilience, and courage. And I know that
Courage.
sort of feels like they're a little bit, like, oh, courage, you just need to be brave. But really, these are important tools. And what I like to share with people is these aren't check boxes. It's not like, okay, I'm adaptable. Okay, resilience. Okay, courage. These are actually like they form an arc, ARC, right? Adaptability, resilience, and courage. And we need flexible tools if we're navigating really, really fluid situations. This is not, we love to think about point A and point B as a straight line, but we all know that between point A and point B, we have a whole roller coaster of adventure to wind ourselves through. So we need tools that are going to be able to move with us through flexible situations. So it's tempting to sort of say, what's the thing I can do? And that's a really tricky question. But if we lean into these skills, these tools, these resources, adaptability, resilience, and courage, it really sets us up for more success. And I think applying them takes this exercising, this strengthening, really giving ourselves permission, as we were talking about earlier, and learning how to shift our perspective. I talked a little bit about reframing some of these words,
Mhm.
right? But this idea of shifting our perspective is not some sort of toxic positivity. Everything needs to be automatically good. It's
Right,
really sort of saying, what if I flip this upside down and looked at it that way? What do I see now? And
right.
sometimes that's enough to say, oh, nope, nope, nope. I was right the first time. It does need to be right side up, but now I know what to do with it. And that's really cool because what I just did there by shifting my perspective was actually dig into that adaptability, resilience, and courage, right? I
Yeah,
didn't I didn't just fall back in the face of something I didn't know. I actually met it in a way that can help me and serve me in moving forward.
I like that you're maybe think of you have to understand your options too. Look at the options because there is no one right way all the time, and
No,
it depends on the situation.
absolutely. And we change. So,
Yes.
so as we are different people constantly evolving into the next versions of ourselves, we have to keep asking ourselves, we have to keep checking in, which is why this idea of alignment, I think, is really, really
Mm,
important to me too, is to sort of say, where do I come back in alignment with myself, my goals, and not only who I am now and what serves me in the current moment, but who I want to be. And then reorienting that as often as we need to is super important as well.
that's true.
The more I think we can get away from things being really fixed and check boxes to, I talk about replacing check boxes with sliders, right? Like, where are you on the spectrum instead of worrying about checking boxes? And I think that ends up serving us a lot better when we have, like I said, flexible tools.
I like that. I like the flexible tool and not just checkbox because I'm one of those. I'd be like, that kind of turns me off if I have to check things off. That's just how I'm.
Yes. Yeah. And what it does, I think, is it just shuts us down, right? Because we'll get to a situation where someone will say to you, well, Bridget, what are you going to do? A or B? And you sort of say, oof. Neither of those feel really great to me. I'm one of those people that's like, I don't know, let's like add C and D and then look at all the options and see what we've got going on. But again, that's a skill. That's something we can develop. We don't have to just take everything at face value. That curiosity, that questioning, that constantly saying, hold on here. Am I seeing everything possible before I'm going forward with making this decision? I think that can be a fun way to approach life.
I like that. You gotta make it fun if you can.
And laugh, right?
Right, you gotta laugh. You gotta look at each situation is different. Every person is different. You need to look at the different perspectives when possible. That's kind of my takeaway here, what we're saying. And you need to have people kind of support you too somehow in growth. I think that I'm guilty too, in the past, trying to do everything by myself.
Yes.
I don't know why
Mhm.
where that came from, because I think women in general, we try to do it all ourselves. That's
We
I
do. We
yeah.
do. And also we're not really practiced at celebrating each other. You know, this is something I think really important too about developing some of these change skills is saying, "Wow, you did that and it didn't work and now you know, and this is a great thing." And it doesn't always feel great in the moment. And again, this is not to bypass any of the challenging spaces of change, but it is to say we don't have to stay in these places of, wow, that was a horrible choice. You made a terrible mistake and
Right.
you will never recover from this, because that is just not true. We see it every single moment that we contract and expand within our body, outside in the world. Every time we have an interaction with somebody, it can alter the course of our next
It's
steps.
true.
That's a really, really cool experience.
Yeah, you don't know where the next step will be after you meet somebody, and then you can also like, oh yeah, I don't want that, and then you go step the opposite direction. It just depends, like I said, on your situation. This is really, I like what you're talking about, embracing the unknown. So where can people get your book? I'm assuming you have a website.
I do. I do. My website is just my name, www.lisadeangelis.com. You can get a link to my book there. It can also be found on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, online, anywhere where books are sold. There's a couple different formats. There's a paperback, hardback, audiobook that I read myself, and an ebook as well.
That is so awesome. And for those that are listening, I'll include the links in the description. I think, what I see is you're embracing and showing everybody the power of learning and how it helps you move forward in life. And change is normal. And sometimes it's hard to move forward.
Absolutely. But I do think we all have the skills to do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just need a little support. And so that was my real goal in this message, in this book, in these efforts, in these conversations. It's to just sort of say, this is just an invitation to explore what it means to change and consider what it might look like to take a different approach. So I'd love to offer your listeners just a 99-cent copy of my ebook if they get it off my website. And so I think we'll put a code right below in the show notes,
Yeah.
um, and we can go from there.
I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your energy. I love it, Lisa. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll talk soon, Lisa.
Thanks so much.